thanks to the Cairo Institute for organizing this important event. I was really pleased to listen to the recommendations of Mr. Voulé, the Special Rapporteur, which contained really very important elements that we would like to also support and reiterate in terms of the visit of special rapporteurs to Algeria. But just to go to some of the elements that we have observed recently, as Amnesty International, we believe that the scale of repression in Algeria right now is really unprecedented, and that there is a descent into a full-blown repression of a scale that we haven't seen before. I mean, obviously, the Hirak movement, which was successful in a way in regaining access to the public spaces and opening up the possibility of dissent in Algeria, which was completely off impossible at some point. Nowadays is facing really a repression that we haven't seen before, and this is due to the fact that after some lull during which the protesters were able to take to the streets in millions and to reclaim the public space and to call for reforms, there was a suspension of the Hirak movement, as we all know, between February 2020 and February 2021. So during this year of suspension of the Hirak, which was due to the COVID crisis and to the halting of the movement, both spontaneously and under the recommendation of the government, there was a suspension of the Hirak, but the government did not suspend its repressive tactics against the movement, and there was an acceleration during this period between February 2020 and 2021 of the repression through the criminalization of online dissent, through the prosecution of hundreds of activists who have expressed themselves online. But since the Hirak has resumed in February 2021, we have seen new tactics, new means that the government has been using in order to suppress and quell the protest movement entirely. And this is these kind of techniques and tactics that we have observed are new because, for example, the government obviously has criminalized the protesters, the protest movement since the beginning through the recourse to penal code articles. We counted more than 20 penal code articles that the government has used during the 2 years of the Hirak movement, but they have added new layers of repression recently, and they have added a new way to demonize the protest movement by a resort to the terrorism label in order to outlaw some of the components of the Hirak movement and in order to criminalize even further the protesters. And we all know from the textbooks of the repressive regimes that once they start using the terrorism label, it becomes really, really very serious and more serious than before, and it becomes an attempt to quell the entire protest movement. And so this is something that is new in Algeria, that started really in March, April of this year, and we didn't see it before. And it shows also that there is now a new discourse towards the Hirak, something that we also didn't observe before, because, for example, when President Tebboune came to power following contested presidential elections, he praised the Hirak movement. Obviously, on the ground, the repression was there, but the discourse was one of praising the Hirak, of talking about the Hirak as being something positive in the history of Algeria. They included the Hirak in the new constitution as being a movement that has opened, you know, like a new space for the Algerians, and so the discourse was one of praise, but the reality on the ground was one of repression. Now the discourse and the reality on the ground are both going in the same direction, which is one of a repressive discourse and a repression on the ground. And so we see that through the obviously adoption of, first of all, a new discourse, demonization of the Hirak movement, and also through the adoption of new articles in the penal code, which were rushed through by the president through ordonnance. So while the parliament was suspended and the parliament, so the legislative assembly was not anymore functional, the president took this approach of creating new laws through ordonnance and adding a new layer of the in the repressive arsenal of the authorities by defining, adding a new definition to terrorism and including as terrorism the attempt to change the nature of the regime, even if it's through peaceful means, which is obviously something that will lead to the criminalization of the Hirak movement through the terrorism, you know, like charges. And they have also adopted a new pace in terms of repression by, for example, labeling some of the components of the Hirak or movements that were active in the Hirak, like MAC, as terrorist organizations, and prosecuting at least 17 or 18, I don't remember exactly the number of people who are being prosecuted nowadays in Algeria for terrorism offenses. So we have the 15 activists from that were prosecuted in Oran, including human rights defenders, which are prominent, like Qadour Chouisha, Jamil Aloukil, and the journalist Saïd Boudour, and 12 others who were prosecuted recently under terrorism charges and conspiracy charges. But we have also another prominent lawyer like Abderraouf Arslan, who was prosecuted under those same charges of terrorism, and other activists as well. So this is really something that is of utmost concern to us as Amnesty, and we believe that this is a new turn of events in Algeria. What is also striking in terms of the new tactics that are used by the authorities is the fact that the authorities are now threatening civil society organizations and political parties of dissolution, something also that is new because, for example, before, obviously the civil society space was under threat, and many human rights organizations and associations in Algeria were facing a difficult situation because they are in a kind of a legal limbo after the authorities adopted a new law in 2012 calling on all organizations to re-register before the authorities, and they were never able to re-register because of the legal hurdles and administrative labyrinth in which the authorities have put them. But now we are in a new, different scale of threats against civil society, because they are now threatening to suspend or dissolve even civil society organizations that are prominent, like I'm sure everybody knew or heard about what happened with RAJ, the Youth Action Rally, Rassemblement Action Jeunesse, which received a notification from the Ministry of Interior that the authorities have filed an urgent action before the administrative court to dissolve it, citing the lack of consistency with its bylaws, which is obviously a spurious, you know, like excuse for dissolving the organization or association. And they have also attempted to suspend two other parties, PST and UCP, which is also something that that is quite worrying. I mean, the special rapporteur already touched upon the attempt to suppress the protest movement also through this new notice that the authorities have released, which calls on the organizers of protests to file a request before the authorities and before the event, with the clear indication of who are the organizers, their names, the path that they will be taking, which are all forms of restrictions against the protest movement, obviously. Another illustration of this new scale of attack is the attempt to undermine the independence of the judiciary. And the fact that you know, judges, courageous judges who have taken quite a critical stance towards the authorities and have denounced the onslaught against judicial independence and the stranglehold that the executive branch is putting on the judiciary. After denouncing that, they have been threatened and also suspended and revoked. And this is what happened to, for example, Judge Merzouk, who was revoked from his position as a judge in a summary way and without any recourse to an independent review of the decision. We have also noticed, as sure as everybody else, the renewed assault against the freedom of the press, with the fact that journalists are being harassed, are being threatened with prosecution or prosecuted just because they did their jobs of covering the protest movement and of going on the streets with their cameras or with their just, you know, like their eyes to observe what was happening on the ground. And they have been targeted in a way that is also quite clear, clearly aimed at suppressing, you know, like reporting on the Hirak. This has happened to several journalists who were arrested during the latest protest movements or latest protests that took place in both Algiers or Oran or other places. We have Kenza Khatou, who was arrested and prosecuted and sentenced to 3 months in jail. Khaled Drarni also repeatedly questioned and now recently also questioned in the Antar military security barracks about his publications. And we have one journalist who is still in prison since months just because he wrote an article about the tribal tensions in the south, and his name is Rebah Karesh. So I'll stop there. I don't want to take too much of your time, but thanks very much for listening. And we hope that the state parties in the upcoming Human Rights Council will really take an action now and call on the Algerian authorities to stop their repression and release all prisoners of opinion who are languishing in Algerian jails. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amna, for this very detailed presentation. I move now to Mouloud, who will give us his kind of perspective from as an Algerian civil society activist on